I woke up with Thea Calder's hand on my waist and the very specific understanding that the situation had crossed several lines I was supposed to care about. For 5 years she had been my professional adversary, the attorney, whose name appeared on the opposing brief every time mine appeared on a motion, who had argued 3 cases against me and won all 3 by margins that left me lying awake counting what I missed. For 5 years she had looked through me in courtrooms across the country, and now she was asleep in a hotel room that someone's catastrophic booking error had decided we were sharing, with her hand on my waist. Whose idea was the rest of it? If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Let me go back to Tuesday evening, to the lobby of the Meridian Grand in Chicago. To the moment before any of this started. I arrived at 9:47. The Hartwell Securities fraud trial was the most significant piece of litigation I had been part of in 5 years of practice, and I had been preparing for it with the particular obsessive focus I brought to cases that mattered, and cases that scared me in equal measure. The Hartwell trial scared me because Thea Calder was on the other side of it. She was always on the other side of things. That was the structure of our professional relationship, if you could call it a relationship, which most days I would not. Thea Calder was 36 years old, a founding partner at Calder Whitmore, one of the most technically precise litigators in the country, and the woman who had opposed me in 3 separate major cases over 5 years and won all 3 by margins that still occupied a dedicated section of my brain at 2 in the morning. The first case was in Denver. A product liability claim involving a pharmaceutical company whose post-market safety data we alleged had been systematically suppressed. We had a strong damages model, a credible expert, and a client with a sympathetic story. Thea had filed a motion to exclude our methodology in the 3rd week of discovery and argued it with the precise efficiency of someone who had already identified the exact structural weakness in the model and had built her entire opposition around it. The judge agreed. We settled for 60% of what the case was worth. I spent the flight back reviewing the transcript and finding the 2 questions I had not asked during cross that would have made the difference. The second case was in New York. An employment discrimination class action. 300 plaintiffs, a major financial firm. We had statistical evidence, pattern testimony, and the kind of documented paper trail that should have made the case relatively straightforward. Thea had been retained by the firm midway through the discovery phase, which was a signal we missed until she had already restructured the defense narrative around a set of alternative explanations for the promotion patterns that the jury found plausible. We lost on the primary claim. I spent the following week writing a legal analysis that I never submitted anywhere, because writing it was the only way I could process what had happened. The third case was in Chicago itself, a securities fraud action involving a smaller company than Hartwell, but with nearly identical mechanics. Insider information. Strategic timing of personal stock sales ahead of a public announcement that cratered the share price. The jury deliberated for 3 days and came back 11-1 in favor of the defense. I stood in the courthouse corridor and heard the verdict over the phone, and did not say anything for a long time afterward. The juror interview that came out 2 weeks later reported that the defense's expert had been more credible than ours on the core question of when the defendants could have known the information was material. Thea's expert was better than ours. She had found him, prepared him, and built the cross-examination strategy that neutralized everything we put forward. It was the most technically sophisticated piece of trial advocacy I had seen from the opposing side of any table I had sat at. I stood in that corridor for 11 minutes after the call ended. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock above the water fountain without deciding to. In the years since, I have tried to understand what I was doing during those 11 minutes, and the closest I have gotten is this. I was accounting for something I did not have a word for yet. Not failure, exactly. I had lost cases before. I knew what losing felt like, the specific decompressing pressure of it. The way the next thought after a bad verdict is always some version of what do we do from here. This was different. This was standing in a building where I had prepared the best case of my career and been outpaced by someone who had studied my case as thoroughly as I had studied it and had simply built better. and what I felt was not devastation and not grief and not the clean procedural disappointment of a skilled loss. It was something I filed under professional admiration and thought about at 2 in the morning. I had spent 6 months since then making our expert on the Hartwell case the best prepared damages methodologist in the country on this specific type of securities fraud. Every weakness Thea's team had exploited in the prior case had been identified and addressed. I had built our damages model from the ground up with the explicit purpose of withstanding whatever she was going to do to it in the pre-trial motion. Because she was going to do something to it. She always found the thing. The pre-trial conference for the motion on expert admissibility was the reason I was in Chicago, in the Meridian Grand Lobby, at 9:47 on a Tuesday evening with the specific exhaustion of 4 hours on a delayed flight from New York. I was halfway to the front desk before I heard it. A second set of heels on the marble. Precise and economical, the particular sound of someone who moved without wasted motion. I looked left. Thea Calder looked right. The recognition was instantaneous and entirely mutual. It always was. My nervous system had developed a specific response to her presence over 5 years of courtroom proximity. Not fear, exactly. The thing a person feels when the most serious challenge in the room has just walked through the door. She was in dark travel slacks and a charcoal blazer with a white shirt at the collar, her hair in the same short controlled cut she wore in every professional context, a leather carry-on that cost more than my first salary negotiation. Her expression was composed in the way it was always composed, which was the kind of composure that required ongoing maintenance and looked effortless, because she had been maintaining it long enough to make effortlessness the default. She said nothing. I said nothing. We both approached the front desk. The clerk was named Fletcher. He had the misfortune of being the person between us and our rooms at 10 in the evening after the longest legal conference day of the fall calendar. "I have a reservation," I said. "Remy Solis, Fort Legal," he typed. His face did a specific thing that made something in my chest contract. "And I also have a reservation," Thea said beside me. "Calder Whitmore," he typed again. The face thing happened more definitively. "There's a note from our reservations team," he said carefully. "A conference block that was supposed to transfer to our Lakeview property didn't fully process." He looked between us with the expression of someone who had delivered this news several times tonight and had not improved at it. "I'm showing one room remaining on this property. A king suite. 18th floor. I have a confirmed reservation," I said. "Single king, 13th floor. I also have a confirmed reservation," Thea said. "Deluxe king, 14th floor. Those rooms are no longer available as booked. The suite is what we have. We can offer a significant rate adjustment and full complimentary services for the inconvenience." Neither of us responded. "There is no availability at adjacent properties tonight," he continued. "The conference has the entire corridor fully committed. I can provide contacts for properties further from the city center." Thea and I looked at each other. The professional assessment took approximately 2 seconds and required no words. We both had 6:15 court appearances. Further from the city center was not a workable sentence. "How many beds?" I said. "1," he said. I picked up my carry-on. Thea picked up hers. "We'll take it," we said simultaneously. A silence. The elevator up to the 18th floor was a smaller car, gold-toned doors that reflected everything. I stood at one end. Thea stood at the other. The building hummed around us. Our reflections looked at each other in the gold surface without turning to do it directly. When the doors opened, she stepped out first. She was closer to the door. I let her, and I registered the concession the moment I made it and declined to examine it further. Room 1804 was at the end of a carpeted corridor that smelled of cedar and the neutral climate-controlled air of hotels that have engineered their environments to feel like no particular place on Earth. Thea scanned the key card. The door opened into a sitting room with 2 high windows that looked directly over Chicago's nighttime grid. A desk, 2 chairs, and a small kitchen passed through with a single-cup coffee maker and a glass refrigerator stocked with water and things I was not going to drink. The bedroom was visible through a set of double doors left slightly ajar. Through the gap, one very large bed. She set her carry-on on the left side of the desk. I set mine on the right. "Ground rules," she said. Her voice in private was quieter than it was in court. The same precision, different volume. "Ground rules," I agreed. "Whatever is discussed in this room does not become part of either side's case strategy." She said it flatly, like a stipulation. "Agreed. Whatever I observe of your preparation is not used in any form. Same expectation in return. Of course, we maintain the same professional conduct we would maintain at any other point during this pre-trial period. That last one was the hardest one. We maintain professional conduct was Thea Calder's way of establishing a container and making sure I understood the container existed. I heard it. I filed it under things I would think about later. "One bed, or do you want the couch?" I asked. The couch was a narrow corporate settee in beige that would have been uncomfortable for someone a foot shorter than either of us. We both looked at it. We both looked at the bedroom. "One bed," she said. She took her carry-on into the bedroom and unpacked with the efficiency of someone who traveled constantly and had reduced every hotel arrival to a 10-minute process. I stood in the sitting room for a moment and made a practical decision that thinking about the situation was not going to improve it. I unpacked on the right side of the dresser. She had claimed the left. The bathroom had 2 sinks. Her travel bag was on the left. I placed mine on the right. We did not discuss this either. The first night's pattern established itself by 11. I was in bed with a brief open on my tablet, reviewing the defense's motion on our damages expert. Thea was at the sitting room desk with the door to the bedroom left partially open. I could hear the quiet sound of her typing, which was consistent and focused, and did not pause the way typing pauses when the person is uncertain. She typed with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was going to say before she said it, which I had learned was one of the core truths about her as an attorney and probably as a person. The typing stopped sometime after 2. A brief pause. The sound of a chair. Then quiet footsteps. Then the careful, economical sound of her getting into bed in the dark without turning on a light. I was not asleep. I was aware of the specific reconfiguration of the room that happens when 2 people who have only been sharing a legal brief are also sharing a mattress. She settled on her side with the stillness of someone who had decided to stop moving and had committed to it. The city below the window did its city thing, that hum of traffic and distance that exists 20 stories up and is never quite silence. I thought about the damages motion. I thought about our expert's deposition transcript. I thought about anything except the 30 inches to my left. The thing I had not anticipated was the specific quality of her presence as a sound. I had been in the same rooms as Thea Calder many times. I knew the way she moved through a courtroom and a corridor and a conference room, the economy of it, the absence of wasted motion. What I had not known was the way she sounded in a space she was not performing in. In court, she was total stillness punctuated by exact movement. Here, there was the sound of her turn on a page of her legal pad. A single, efficient sound, not a rustle, more deliberate than that. And the specific quality of her chair at the desk when she leaned back slightly, which she apparently did at intervals while reviewing material. A motion I would not have predicted if asked to describe her at work. Small things. The kind of things you only know about a person when you are in the same room with them late at night with no professional reason to be paying attention. I lay in the dark and paid attention and told myself I was thinking about the motion. The city below the window was doing what cities do at 1 in the morning, that particular reduced hum of traffic and distance, and it occurred to me that I had spent 10 years in hotel rooms preparing for trials and had never before been so aware of someone in the adjacent room. Or the same room. Or the 30 inches to my left. The grammar of the situation had changed without the facts of it changing, and the only honest accounting of why was the one I was not going to do at 1 in the morning the night before, the most important motion of the Hartwell pre-trial. Eventually, I slept. The pre-trial conference was scheduled across 5 days. Day 1 was the admissibility motion, specifically our statistical methodology expert, and whether his model for calculating shareholder damages met the threshold standards Thea had challenged in her brief. 28 pages of defense argument, painstakingly constructed around the assumption gaps she had identified in the model's architecture. I had filed a 24-page response. The response was better than anything I had submitted in any of the 3 prior cases. I knew it because I had read it against hers and found the places where it held and the places where it didn't, and I had rebuilt every place where it didn't. I was at the courthouse at 6:10. The Dirksen building on South Dearborn had the particular stillness of a federal building before 7, that hum of overhead lighting and air handling and old wood, and the institutional smell of buildings that have been resolving disputes since before either of us was born. My paralegal Bex Hartley was already at our table, document binders organized in the prep order we had worked out the week before. She handed me coffee without being asked and pointed at the binder flagged in blue. Thea arrived at 6:12 in a black suit that had been made for her rather than purchased. Her hair was pinned, a single thin watch on her left wrist. She opened her materials with the focused attention of someone who had accounted for every possible development in the next 6 hours and had organized herself around each of them. She did not look at me. I did not look at her. Judge Miriam Cole took the bench at 7 sharp. She had read both briefs twice. This was evident from her questions, which were technically precise and showed no interest in the general shape of the arguments and considerable interest in the specific gaps where the 2 positions diverged most acutely. Thea argued the defense's position on admissibility for 44 minutes. I had heard her argue before. I had been across the table from her in 2 courtrooms before this one. I had reviewed her oral argument transcripts on other cases because the way you prepare for Thea Calder is by studying Thea Calder with the same rigor you would bring to any problem that could destroy you if you were not ready for it. Nothing in those transcripts had prepared me for watching her work in a room this small, on a motion this central to the case, from across a table where I was the only one who could answer her. She did not perform. That was the thing about her in court that no transcript fully conveyed. Other litigators performed precision. Thea simply was precise, which was a different quality entirely and far more disorienting to be across from. Her language had no decorative elements. Every word was chosen for its accuracy and its load-bearing function in the sentence, and the result was an argument that moved like a well-built thing. No wobble, no unnecessary weight. I made my response with complete attention. I argued the methodology for 49 minutes and used every preparation hour I had, and when I sat down, Bex's face told me it had landed in the room the way it needed to. Judge Cole's ruling came at 4:15. She allowed our damages model with 2 conditions on how the assumptions would be framed for the jury. We had won the motion conditionally. I sat with that for a moment while Thea made a brief note on her legal pad and began organizing her materials with the same composure she had brought to the start of the day. In the space between the bench clearing and the courtroom emptying, we were briefly at adjacent ends of the same counsel table for the first time in months. Not the first time we had been physically near each other. We had been near each other in hotels and airports and industry events for 5 years. But this was the first time we had been near each other since Tuesday night. Since the lobby with the gold-toned elevator and the room at the end of the carpeted corridor. She capped her pen. I closed the binder in front of me. 2 feet of table surface between us and Judge Cole's water pitcher still sitting on the bench and the clerk moving papers behind the railing. She looked at me. It lasted less than a second. Professional acknowledgement. The kind that happens between opposing counsel after a ruling, nothing more than the small nod that means the day is done, and we can each go be adversaries in private now. Exactly the right duration, not 1 fraction of a second longer than the context required. I looked back. Then Bex was at my elbow and Thea was at the door with her associate, and the moment closed in the way that moments between us always closed, which was completely and without evidence. In the corridor outside, Bex took my arm briefly. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was pleased, but not going to make it a whole thing. "The conference reception is at 7, she said. "I'll handle the summary email. Go eat something that isn't courthouse cafeteria." I went back to the Meridian Grand. The suite was empty when I arrived. Afternoon light from the west was coming through both windows and doing something worth looking at to the city below. I stood at the window for a moment and let the day decompress from the inside. Then I went to the bathroom to wash my face, and found, on the left sink, Thea Calder's travel-sized face wash, and the small tube of hand cream she apparently kept on the left side of every bathroom she occupied, arranged with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. A toothbrush, lip balm, a single thin silver earring she had apparently removed and set on the edge of the sink's rim. A single, thin silver earring. I looked at it for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and then I washed my face and went back to the desk. She came back at 5:30. I was reviewing my notes for the next motion. She registered my presence with a look that took approximately 1 second, set her briefcase on the desk beside mine, and moved to the bedroom. "The ruling held," she said from the doorway. "Your model is in with conditions." "Under the conditions," I said. "Under the conditions." She paused for a moment at the doorway. "The next motion is the conflict of interest allegation on expert selection." "I know," I said. She nodded once and went into the bedroom. The closet opened and closed. The soft, composed sounds of someone who changed from a courtroom suit with the same efficiency they did everything else. I looked at the window and thought about nothing specific. The conference reception was in a ballroom 3 floors below the pre-trial hearings. It was the kind of professional social event that exists to maintain the fiction that opposing counsel enjoy spending evenings together discussing trends in federal civil procedure. The food was unexpectedly good. The bar was open and professionally staffed. I arrived with Bex. Thea arrived 5 minutes later, alone, and moved through the room with the purposeful economy of someone who was present because the institution required it, and had calculated exactly how long present needed to be. She spoke to Judge Cole's senior clerk. She spoke to the opposing defense expert's lead counsel. She accepted a glass of wine, held it, and did not visibly drink from it. Bex navigated us toward the window. Maximum sightlines, minimum surface area to defend. It was the same position I would have chosen if I had gotten there first, and I noticed, across the room, that Thea had positioned herself near an equivalent point. She might have noticed it too. If she did, nothing in her expression acknowledged it. "The woman in the blue blazer," Bex said, with the tone of a weather report, "has been looking at you for the past several minutes." I looked. She was standing near the far end of the reception, in conversation with 2 of the plaintiff's side consulting economists, leaning slightly toward the speaker with the posture of someone genuinely listening rather than cataloging their response. Dark brown hair cut to her shoulders. A warmth in the way she occupied a room that was different from professional warmth, which is a performance, and genuine warmth, which was what this looked like. When she registered my attention, she smiled. A real one. "Ines Adler," Bex said. "She's on the Frankfurt program, International Arbitration Track. I saw her on the speaker list this morning." She crossed the room. Her English was slightly formal at the edges with a Frankfurt cadence underneath, and she turned out to be one of the more genuinely interesting people I had spoken to at a professional function in 2 years. She had worked complex international arbitration cases across 3 continents and had a specific kind of impatience with procedural overcaution that she expressed with complete directness and occasional profanity, the way people who are expert at something become comfortable cursing about the parts of it that frustrate them. She had read the publicly available portions of our damages methodology and had questions about the assumptions framework that were sharp enough to tell me she had actually understood it, and not just the surface. I liked her immediately. We talked for most of the second hour. Bex drifted away somewhere around the 40-minute mark, which I noted without addressing. Ines refilled her wine. I did the same. The reception noise was the particular hum of a professional gathering that has gotten comfortable, all those conversations at once making a sound that smoothed into something you could speak inside without being heard from 3 feet away. At some point during the 3rd hour, I became aware of a specific quality of attention on my left side. Not a sound, not movement, just the particular awareness of sustained directed attention that registers before you can explain why. I glanced left. Thea was standing approximately 12 feet away, in conversation with a woman from the court's mediation office. Her face was arranged for the event, composed in the way it was always composed. Her eyes were on the conversation, except that her pen was not moving. She kept a thin, gold-barreled pen in the upper pocket of whatever jacket she wore at these events. She used it to make small, precise notations on the program cards that conferences always provided. The pen was in her hand. It was completely still. And the muscle at the corner of her jaw, the one that moved when she was containing something, was doing the small, careful thing it did when she was managing a reaction she had decided no one should see. She looked at Inez, then at me. Then she said something to the woman from the mediation office, and the conversation resumed. I looked back at Inez. We continued talking. I did not say anything to Bex about the pen. Inez and I exchanged cards as the reception was ending. She said something about dinner the following evening if my schedule allowed, which I told her might be possible. She walked toward the elevator with the easy confidence of someone who had said exactly what she meant and was comfortable with the response. I watched her go. When I turned back, Thea was already near the exit. She did not look at me as she left. The suite was quieter than it had been the night before. Thea's blazer was over the back of the chair when I arrived, her briefcase on the desk beside mine. The bedroom door was pulled partially closed. Through the gap, I could hear the deliberate, focused quiet of someone working and not interested in company. I sat at the desk with my legal pad and my notes for the following morning, and a second glass of the wine from the reception that I had gotten into the habit of taking back to the hotel in a paper cup, since the 3rd year of practicing law. You were speaking with Adler for most of the evening. She had come to the doorway of the bedroom without my hearing her. Dark slacks and a gray shirt, her hair not pinned, which was the specific version of her that existed only in this room. She stood with one hand resting on the doorframe in a way that looked casual and was not. Inez Adler, I said. From the Frankfurt track. I know who she is. The flatness of it. Not sharp. Just level. She has strong opinions about damages methodology under federal standards, I said. I'm sure she does. The room did a small, quiet adjustment. Not a sound. Just something in the quality of the air. She's not connected to the case, I said. I didn't say she was. I looked at Thea. She looked at her own hand on the doorframe, then at the window, then at me. Your pen was still, I said, at the reception, 4 minutes, roughly, while you were watching us. The measurement of that. What it said about how much attention I had been paying. She said, I was watching the conversation you were having, not you specifically. That is a very careful distinction. It's an accurate one. It's the kind of accurate that also happens to be something other than the whole truth, I said. Which, I know, because you and I have been making those kinds of accurate statements at each other across courtroom tables for 5 years. A pause. The city continued its indifference through the window behind her. The pen was still, I said, because something in the room had your full attention. I have seen that pen be still in court twice in 5 years. Once was during closing arguments in Denver when opposing counsel said something that you had not anticipated, and once was during the deposition in March when the witness said the name of the document you had been looking for and had not yet found in discovery. She looked at me without speaking. I have been watching you for 5 years, I said. That is what happens when someone is consistently your most difficult professional problem. Enemies pay attention to each other, she said. They do. And I wanted to know what the pen meant tonight, I said. She let go of the doorframe. She moved to the second chair at the sitting room desk, the one that had been unoccupied since we arrived, and sat in it with the posture of someone who had made a decision to stay rather than leave, which was itself a piece of information. The pen was still, she said, because the attention in that conversation was not professional. I noted that. And she looked at the window. And I made a professional assessment that a conversation with that quality of attention between you and someone who is not connected to the case during a period 11 days from trial was worth noting. That is the version that lives inside the container, I said. I want the version outside it. She looked at me. The composure was doing its work. But something had changed in the room. The way rooms change when the actual subject has finally been named in them, and the composure knew it was being measured in a different way now. The version outside the container, she said slowly, is that something about watching that conversation was harder than I expected it to be. Why? She picked up the pen from the desk, held it for a moment, and set it back down. Because I am not indifferent to you, she said. I have not been indifferent to you for some time, and the shape of that has always been containable inside the professional structure, because the professional structure is very robust and I have been using it very deliberately. Tonight the structure had a gap in it. She said it the way she argued motions, without decoration, with complete precision and no performance. I looked at her. What kind of gap? I asked. She looked at Inez Adler's business card, which I had placed on the desk when I came in. She did not touch it. She just looked at it. The kind that means watching someone be drawn to you, she said, registers as a loss, rather than nothing. The room was very quiet. I said, that is the most honest thing you've said to me in 5 years. She said, it is the first honest thing I've said to you outside of a courtroom. A silence that was not uncomfortable. The city below moved through the window. The desk lamp made its small, warm oval between us. What do you want to do with it? I asked. She looked at me for a long, level moment. Nothing, she said. Nothing I can do from here. Here being? She looked at the window. 11 days from trial on the case I have spent 6 months building. Opposing counsel to your plaintiff class. She said it cleanly, the way she said things that were true and inconvenient. I cannot do anything appropriate with it from here, and doing anything inappropriate with it would cost both of us things neither of us can afford to lose. So you're going to keep managing it. I've been managing it for longer than tonight. The admission. How long it implied. I said, what do you need from me while you do that? She looked at me. The composure did something at its edges. A slight rearrangement. The way a very controlled structure shifts slightly when someone asks the right question rather than the expected one. Nothing, she said. I don't need anything from you. I told you because you asked, and because you noticed the pen, and because in this room there is no professional frame to file it into. I nodded. I'm going to go to sleep, she said. We have the conflict of interest motion at 8. She stood. She moved toward the bedroom with the economy she always moved with. Thea, I said. She stopped. Enemies don't share beds, I said. She was quiet for a moment with her back to me. No, she said. They don't. So whose idea was this? She looked back over her shoulder. The lamp was catching the gray of her eyes in a way it had not managed before. The hotel made the assignment, she said. That's the container version. A pause. The smallest thing happened at the corner of her mouth. Then let's say it was a mutual failure of imagination, she said. We both could have demanded separate properties. We didn't. No, I said. We didn't. She went into the bedroom. I sat at the desk for a long time. The city below went on without us. Its particular and indifferent hum. The business card with Inez Adler's name on it was on the desk to my left, and I understood, sitting there, that I was not going to have dinner with Inez Adler the following evening, and that the reason for this was something I had not quite named yet. I went to bed after midnight. The lights in the sitting room off, the city providing what light it provided through the gap in the curtains. Thea was on her side of the bed, composed even in stillness, and the room was the specific kind of quiet that exists when two people are both awake and both pretending otherwise. I lay there and thought about the pen. 4 minutes of absolute stillness. A woman whose control was the most complete I had encountered in any professional context, who managed everything with the deliberate structure of someone who had decided long ago that management was safer than exposure, and the gap that had appeared in that management tonight, and the honesty that had come through it. Managing it, she had said, as if it were a case, as if it were a motion that needed careful preparation before it could be brought. I thought about 5 years of opposing briefs and courthouse corridors, and the Denver verdict, and the New York verdict, and the third trial in this same city where she had built a better case than mine, and won it, and I had stood in the corridor afterward not quite feeling what I expected to feel about losing. I thought about the pen being still. I was not asleep when her hand found my waist. Not immediately, not right away. It was the kind of thing that happens in the long middle of the night when the body makes decisions the mind has been carefully not making, when the space between two people who have been very deliberate about distance finally exceeds the ability of the will to maintain it. Her hand settled at my waist with the slowness of something that was not quite conscious and was not quite not, and the warmth of it was very specific and very present, and I thought, there it is. Her breathing said she was asleep. Or was deciding to be. I lay very still. The city did its city thing below us. 11 days to the start of trial. Opposing counsel. A case that both of us had built the best arguments of our careers around. A professional structure that was robust and deliberate, and that had a gap in it the size of a hotel room in Chicago, where neither of us had chosen to demand separate accommodation when the option had technically existed. I looked in the ceiling. I thought about the word loss, the way she had used it. Watching someone be drawn to you registers as a loss, not a professional problem, not a complication. A loss. Her hand was warm at my waist and the room was very quiet, and I had 5 years of carefully managed professional adversary to account for, and what I was thinking about was the smallest thing at the corner of her mouth when she said mutual failure of imagination, the almost possibility of a smile from a woman I had never seen, smile at anything except the occasional precision of her own arguments. This was the question the rest of the story was going to answer. Whose idea was it? We were both awake. We were both pretending otherwise. And the night had a long way left to go. Her hand was still there when the alarm went off at 5:30. Neither of us moved immediately. There is a specific quality of stillness that happens when two people are both awake and both deciding whether to acknowledge it, and that was the quality of room 1804 at 5:30 on a Wednesday morning in Chicago, 20 stories above a city that had been entirely indifferent to us all night and would continue to be. Her hand moved first. A slow, deliberate withdrawal, the kind that a generous reading of the evidence might describe as unconscious. I had the same quality of information I had had at 2 in the morning, which was that Thea Calder was not asleep, and had not been asleep for most of the previous several hours, and that whatever she was deciding about this information, she was deciding with great care. I sat up, got out of bed, went to the bathroom and ran cold water and looked at my face in the mirror and thought about what I was going to do with the next 4 days of a pre-trial conference that was also a hotel room I shared with the woman whose hand had just been at my waist. I heard her get up while I was still at the mirror. The bathroom was large enough for two people with good spatial awareness and a mutual agreement not to discuss what was happening. We were both those things. I finished at my sink and moved to make coffee at the kitchen pass-through. She came out in the blazer I had not yet seen her wear, a shade between charcoal and black that I was cataloging without particularly intending to. "The conflict of interest motion," she said. 8 o'clock, I said. She nodded once. She took the cup of coffee I had made and replaced it with the one that was hers. A small, calibrated exchange that we had arrived at without discussing it, the same way we had arrived at the sink arrangement and the side of the dresser and the particular quality of silence that had been the room's atmosphere since Tuesday night. We left for the courthouse at 6:45. The conflict of interest allegation was the motion I had been least confident about. The defense's theory was that our damages expert had a prior consulting relationship with an attorney at a sister firm in the plaintiff class, and that this relationship had colored the model's assumptions in ways that should disqualify the expert under federal standards. We had filed our response 3 weeks earlier. I had worked the argument as carefully as I had worked the methodology response, but the underlying facts were closer to the line than I would have preferred. Thea argued the motion for 51 minutes. She was right about the consulting relationship. She had found a document in discovery that our response had addressed, but that her oral argument framed in a way I had not fully anticipated, and I watched Judge Cole's face during the argument and saw the thing that experienced litigators learn to read. The particular attention that means a judge is reconsidering something they thought was settled. I argued for 42 minutes. I addressed the document. I contextualized the relationship. I argued the distinction between professional connection and substantive bias with everything I had prepared. When I sat down, I was less certain than I wanted to be. Judge Cole recessed for 20 minutes and came back with a ruling that limited our expert's ability to address certain internal assumptions, but did not exclude him. A narrower win than yesterday. Thea had gained ground. In the corridor outside, Bex fell into step beside me and said nothing for half a block. "She found the document you were worried about," she said finally. "She finds everything," I said. "By reading every page." Bex was quiet again. Then she said, "You have been watching her argue for 4 hours across 2 days, and I have been watching you watch her." I looked at Bex. She looked at me with the uncomplicated honesty she deployed on exactly the occasions when it cost me most. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "You have been watching her argue," she said. "In the way someone watches the thing they find most interesting, not the way someone watches a problem. You don't have to be doing anything. I'm noting the distinction." She headed toward the elevator. I stood in the corridor for a moment and thought about distinctions. The second night in the suite was quieter than the first in the way that silence is sometimes louder than noise. We did not address the hand. We did not address anything beyond the case preparation that both of us carried into the room and the professional composure that had been holding since the morning. She was at the desk. I was in the bedroom with the door partially open. The typing was there, and then not there, and then the careful, economical footsteps. She settled on her side of the bed. I lay still on mine. At some point I became aware, without turning, that she was looking at the ceiling. The particular stillness of someone who is not sleeping, and is not going to be the first one to speak. I did not speak either. I thought about management as a concept. Thea had used the word the night before with the precision she brought to every word, which meant it was not an evasion, but an accurate description of a real activity. Managing it, which meant she had taken the thing she was feeling and organized it into something functional, given it a structure, decided what it was allowed to do and where it was allowed to exist. The same architecture she brought to a complex piece of litigation, not suppression, but containment, intentional and maintained. The thing about containment is that it requires ongoing effort. A case file does not manage itself. You review it, you update it, you account for new evidence, and adjust the structure accordingly. She had been doing that with something for 3 years. Every case we shared, every corridor encounter, every industry event where we both appeared on the same shortlist and found opposite corners of the room. 3 years of active maintenance, and the hand had still happened, which told me something specific about the limits of management that I did not think she would find it useful to hear at 2 in the morning before the third day of pretrial motions. I looked at the ceiling too. The city outside the window was different at 2 than it was at midnight, quieter in a way that made the distance between us in the room feel more precisely measured. 31 inches. I had been accurate about that the first night, and I had verified it now without meaning to. We were very good at this. 5 years of being controlled in each other's presence had produced a specific facility with the kind of shared quiet that required no acknowledgement, that could simply exist while both of us decided what to do with what we both knew. In the morning, we argued the motion on jury questionnaire scope with the focused competence the task required. The afternoon was a conference session on trial scheduling. We sat at opposite ends of the room with our respective teams, and the professional distance between us was correct and appropriate, and entirely insufficient as a description of the actual distance. Inez Adler found me in the courthouse lobby at 5:30. She was in a coat against the November cold, which had arrived properly overnight. She had the ease of someone who had decided to approach and found no difficulty in the decision. "You owe me a dinner," she said. "But I suspect you are going to offer coffee." I said coffee was accurate. The place 2 blocks from the courthouse was warm and smelled of roasted things and had small tables that gave conversations a contained feeling. She was genuinely good company, as she had been at the reception. She had questions about federal procedure that were real questions, and opinions about international arbitration that were precise and occasionally pungent. And we talked for an hour in the comfortable way you can talk to someone who has no stake in the thing you are not saying. At the end of the hour, when I had flagged for the check and she was pulling her coat from the back of the chair, she said, May I say something that is none of my business? I said she could. She looked at me with the directness I had identified on the first night as the thing that made her immediately likable. The attorney you share the hotel with? She said. I do not know the situation. I can see it is professional and complicated and that there are obvious reasons you have not said anything about it. But the way you talk about her, including when you are not talking about her at all, I noticed it at the reception. I notice it now. I looked at my cup. She is a formidable opponent, I said. I am sure she is, Inez said. And the way someone speaks about a formidable opponent is usually not the way you speak about her. She paused. I have no claim on your evening and nothing at stake in your situation. I said it because it seemed like the true thing to say, and because I think you already know it, and because the coffee was very good. She offered her hand. I shook it. She left. I sat in the coffee place for a long time. She had said, the way you talk about her, including when you are not talking about her at all. I thought about what that meant from the outside. I thought about what it meant from the inside, which was something I had been categorizing for 5 years under professional investment and rigor, and the particular focus that difficult opponents demand, and which had been something else for longer than I had been honest about. I knew what it meant. I had known it since the Denver flight home, reading a deposition transcript and finding the 2 questions I had not asked, and understanding that my attention to her work was not fully explained by the case. I went back to the Meridian Grand. The suite was lit the way it was when Thea was working. The desk lamp and the kitchen passed through light, and the bedroom dark beyond the open doors. She was at the desk in the blazer, her legal pad in front of her, the pen moving across it with focused authority. She looked up when I came in. I sat in the second chair, the one that had been empty until she sat in it 2 nights ago. She put the pen down. Inez Adler said something to me, I said. She looked at the legal pad. She said, the way I talk about you is not the way someone talks about an opponent, I said. She said it seemed like the true thing to say and that she thought I probably already knew it. A pause. The lamp between us. And do you? Thea said. Already know it? Yes, I said. The room was very quiet. Outside, the city was doing its evening thing, that specific quality of Chicago traffic carrying up 20 stories through glass and steel in the particular way of cities that hold their sounds. Then I know it too, she said. Her voice on those words was the smallest I had heard it, smaller than anything in any courtroom. She picked up the pen, held it, set it back down. What do you want to do about it? I asked. She looked at me for a long time. The composure was real and present and working as hard as I had ever seen it work. I want to finish this conference, she said, and argue the Hartwell trial, and let the verdict be whatever the verdict is. And after that, I want to have a real conversation with you that is not happening inside the context of opposing counsel. That is a very controlled answer, I said. It is. Is there an uncontrolled one? She stood. She moved to the window. The city beyond the glass was a grid of light from this height, constant and indifferent, and in its way very beautiful. She stood at the window with her back to me for a moment. Then she turned around. The uncontrolled answer, she said, is that I have been aware of you as something other than opposing counsel since the 3rd deposition in the New York case. When you asked a question in cross-examination that I had been planning to ask, and you asked it 3 seconds before I would have, and I sat across that table and thought, there she is, and that I have been managing that awareness through 2 subsequent verdicts and 147 professional interactions, and every brief I have read with your name on it for 3 years. 3 seconds, I said. The same words, she said. I had written the question in my notes that morning, word for word. I looked at her. You won the New York case, I said. I know. You built a better case and won it, and you were holding that the whole time. She looked at the window. Then at me. I built the better argument, she said, because I had been paying complete attention to you for 3 months before that courtroom, and the attention made my preparation better. I understood your theory of the case from the outside as thoroughly as you knew it from the inside. And yes, the whole time. The room contracted to the size of something that had been true for a long time and was being said for the first time. I stood up. I moved to where she was standing at the window, close enough that the composure in her shoulders was visible as the specific effort it was. The city was behind her. The lamp was behind me. The trial, I said. After the trial, she said. 9 more days of pre-trial. After those too. I said, I want to know whether you can walk into that courtroom knowing what we both now know and argue against me the way the case requires. She met my eyes directly. The gray of them in the window light was steady and very clear. I have been doing it for 5 years, she said. This is different from before tonight. I know that. And I am going to go into that courtroom and be the best opposing counsel you have ever faced, because that is what I owe you, and what I owe the case, and what I owe myself. And it is going to cost considerably more than anything I have done before. And after, I said. And after, she said. All of it. We were very close. The room was the size of whatever was actually true between us. I want to ask you one more thing, I said. She waited. The hand, I said. Last night. Were you asleep? The longest pause she had given anything in 5 years. No, she said. Were you deciding to be? Yes. What were you deciding? She looked at me. All the composure. The jaw set, the shoulder line still, and something else visible at the edges of all that control, something that had been there for 3 years at least and had never been this close to the surface. I was deciding, she said, whether to acknowledge it, or to let you wake up in the morning with an answer that required nothing from either of us. Which did you decide? She held my gaze. I am still deciding, she said. I touched her jaw, the warm line of it, her skin. I felt the breath she took, the one that cost something to keep measured, the evidence of 5 years of management arriving at its limit. She did not step back. She looked at me with the composure changing quality, not breaking but transforming, the way certain things transform when the right pressure is finally applied. I kissed her. It was not desperate. It was not frantic or hurried. It was the specific patience of something that has been waited for, the unhurried quality of a first meeting arranged across 5 years of everything else. Her hand found my shoulder and stayed there like a decision. Neither of us rushed the thing we had been not doing for all the time we had been doing everything else. When we separated, the city was still there. The lamp was still where it had been. Nothing in the room had changed its dimensions. She looked at me. The composure was fully present, and the something else was also fully present, and neither of them was hidden anymore. After the trial, she said. I know, I said. All of it. After. I know, I said. We stood at the window for a while without talking. The city below went on with its indifference to us, which had been constant and which we were finally in a position to return. The last 2 days of the pre-trial conference were the most focused work I had produced in any professional context. I understood, going into that courtroom on Thursday morning, that clarity sometimes comes from things finally being named, that the energy spent on management becomes available for other things when the management is no longer required. My argument on the jury instruction scope was the cleanest piece of oral advocacy I had produced in 2 years. I knew it while I was making it. Bex's face confirmed it afterward. Thea was exactly what she had said she would be. She was formidable in precisely the way she had always been, technically, without a single element in her courtroom presence that the professional context did not warrant. I watched her argue across those 2 days and understood that she had meant every word she said at the window. She was going to be the best opposing counsel I had ever faced because that was what she had decided to be. And Thea Calder's decisions were not provisional. It was the most clarifying and the most difficult thing I had experienced in a courtroom. We checked out of room 1804 on Friday evening. I was at the desk with my rolling case when she came out of the bedroom with her carry-on and the leather bag. She stopped in the middle of the sitting room for a moment. I have a car at 6:30, she said. I have a 6 o'clock flight, I said. She looked at the room. The desk with nothing on it. The two chairs that had been used differently than their design intended. The window with the city beyond it. Still indifferent. Still going on. She looked at me. The hand was mine, she said. In case that was still a question. I looked at her. The staying awake was mine, I said. In case that was also a question. The corner of her mouth. The thing that cost her something each time it arrived. The almost smile that was more precise than a full one because it was entirely honest. She picked up her carry-on. Monday, she said. Monday, I said. She left. I stood in room 1804 for a moment with my rolling case, and the city view, and the lamp on the desk that we had both used differently from how the hotel had intended it. Then I picked up my case and went to the elevator. The Hartwell trial ran 21 days. I will not reconstruct every motion, every examination, every chambers conference that Judge Cole called when the temperature between counsel tables required her attention. I will say that Thea Calder argued the defense of the Hartwell executives with the most technically sophisticated trial advocacy I had encountered in 5 years of practice, and that I argued the plaintiff class's case with the full preparation and the specific knowledge that the person across the table had spent 3 years paying close enough attention to understand exactly how I thought. It made both of us better. There is a version of competition that diminishes the participants, where proximity to a capable adversary produces anxiety that constricts instead of focus that clarifies. And there is the other version, where the adversary is good enough that your best is the only thing you have to offer, and your best keeps arriving because the alternative is being outpaced by someone whose quality demands it. We gave each other that version across 21 days. Both trial teams stayed at the same hotel. This was, in retrospect, a detail that should have been logistically addressed at the start of the trial but was not, because neither of us had made a point of it, and neither of our firms had thought to. The result was that we occupied the same hotel restaurant at dinner on most evenings, on opposite sides of the room, with our respective associates, and the particular careful theater of not acknowledging each other that everyone understood was being performed, and no one addressed. On the 9th evening, Bex leaned across our table and said, without looking at the other side of the room, her first chair is telling her something she disagrees with. How do you know? I asked. Because she has been holding her wine glass for 4 minutes, Bex said, and she is not drunk from it and she has not set it down. I did not look. I did not have to. I had been cataloging the specific inventory of Thea's tells for 5 years. The held glass meant something was requiring more containment than usual, which meant the first chair had said something she was processing rather than accepting. On the 12th day, the Chambers Conference on the late-added documentary evidence ran 40 minutes, and for 35 of those 40 minutes, it was Judge Cole, and the two of us, and no one else. And whatever the professional circumstances were, they were also 35 minutes in a small wood-paneled room where Thea Calder was close enough that I could have reached across the conference table and touched her arm. I did not. She did not. We argued our respective positions on the documentary evidence with the focused precision the circumstance required. When we walked out, she held the door. It was an automatic thing, the kind of courtesy that happens before the mind accounts for it. She had been closer to the door and the door was heavy. She held it. I passed through. Our eyes met for exactly the duration that accidental proximity produces, and then both of us looked at the hallway. Neither of us mentioned it. Both of us filed it. I watched her work and understood things about my own arguments I had not understood before being forced to build them against hers. On the 3rd day, she made an objection during the redirect of our second fact witness that I had not anticipated, and the 30 seconds I spent formulating the response was the most focused 30 seconds of the trial. On the 11th day, I made an argument in closing of the damages section that stopped her pen mid-stroke, and I knew from the quality of the stillness that it had landed where I wanted it. Both of our experts held. Both of our theories of the case held, in their respective shapes. The jury deliberated for 6 days. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon in December. The jury found for the plaintiff class on the primary securities fraud count. The damages figure was $193 million, substantially below the $430 million we had sought, substantially above the $40 million the defense had argued as the outer limit of any plausible finding. Neither side had won completely. Both sides had. I stood in the courtroom when the foreperson read the verdict and felt the particular settlement that comes when a case produces an honest outcome. Not satisfaction exactly and not relief exactly, but the sense that the process had arrived somewhere fair, the kind of verdict both sides could live with, which is the best that most verdicts are. I looked across the counsel table. Thea was gathering her materials with the composed efficiency she brought to everything. Her face was arranged, her hands were steady. She made a brief notation on her legal pad and capped the pen and laid it precisely alongside. Then she looked up. We looked at each other across the counsel table for 1 second longer than the professional context required. Then both of us looked away. In the courthouse corridor, my client's representative shook my hand and expressed qualified satisfaction and asked about appellate risk. And I gave him the honest answer, which was that the damages finding was defensible, and within the range Judge Cole would sustain, and that both sides had reason to expect the other to file their appellate notices within 60 days. Bex appeared at my elbow. She said, "What happens now?" I said, "Post-trial motions. Appellate briefing." She said, "I meant the other thing." I looked at her. "The other thing," she said calmly, "is not separate from your professional performance. You have been a better attorney in these 3 weeks than in the 2 years I have worked for you. I am not saying that cruelly. I am saying it because whatever was happening across that counsel table made the trial better for both of you, and I would like you to not be the person who undoes it by overthinking the aftermath." I looked at the courthouse ceiling. "She is on the other side of the verdict," I said. "She is," Bex said, "and so are you. And the verdict came back fair anyway." She said, "Remy, go find her." I went outside. The courthouse steps on South Dearborn in December were cold in the specific way Chicago is cold, which is cold, plus the wind off the lake that locates every gap in a coat. The sky was the flat white of a day that had already done whatever light it was going to do. Thea was on the steps with her carry-on and her coat. She was on the phone. She finished the call as I came down toward her. She looked at me. "The verdict," I said. "Was fair," she said. "Your client will appeal the damages." "Probably," she said. "So will yours." She held her coat closed against the wind. "The appeal will take 18 months and settle somewhere in the middle, and we will both argue motions we have argued before and find new ones we have not. Is that a professional assessment? Or a realistic one?" "They are the same thing," she said. "Usually." I stood on the courthouse steps with the December cold and Thea Calder 2 feet away and 21 days of trial behind us and everything that had been said in room 1804 occupying the same space as the wind. "What happens now?" I said. She looked at me. The composure had the particular quality it had had at the window in the suite when I touched her jaw. Present, and also changed, the transformation still visible in the texture of it. "I am flying to New York this evening," she said. "Client meeting tomorrow morning. I am in New York next week for the post-trial debrief." She looked at the street, then back at me. "There is a restaurant on 68th and Lexington," she said. "They have a table at the back window with enough separation from the bar that a real conversation is possible. I have gone there after difficult trials for 6 years." I looked at her. "I want to have that real conversation," she said. "Without the case between us and without the hotel room and the ground rules. Just the thing itself." "Tuesday," I said. "Tuesday," she said. A cab was pulling up along the curb. The reliable way cabs appeared at federal courthouses in the early evening. She picked up her carry-on. She turned at the bottom of the steps and looked up at me with the December wind between us and the flat white sky. "The hand was mine," she said. "I know," I said. "It has been mine to think about since." The corner of her mouth. That specific, expensive thing. She got in the cab. I watched it pull away and stood on the courthouse steps for a moment with the cold, doing what it always did in December in Chicago, and thought about Tuesday. It did not feel as cold as it had 10 minutes ago. I went to find Bex. Tuesday came. The restaurant was exactly what she had described. Warm, low-lit, the table at the back window where the city was present but not intrusive. She was already there when I arrived, in dark slacks and a wool blazer the shade of charcoal, her hair down the way it only was in private. And I understood sitting down across from her that wearing it down to this dinner was the same kind of decision as telling me about the New York deposition. Small, deliberate, true. We talked for 3 hours. Not about the case, not about the verdict or the post-trial motions or the appellate briefing that both of us had already begun drafting in the parallel lives our professional selves kept running regardless of everything else. We talked about the specific shape of doing this kind of work, the cost of it, the moments in the law that had been the reason she chose it, and the moments that had made her question whether the choice was right. She talked about the career she had imagined at 23, and the one she had built at 36, and the particular gap between them that she had spent years accounting for. She talked about her first courtroom loss, a case early in her career, one she had been certain of, where the verdict came back wrong on a question she had not thought to address in her preparation, and where the error was entirely hers. She had gone over the transcript for months afterward with the specific rigor she brought to every failure, and what she had concluded was not that she had argued badly, but that she had been so certain of her own structure that she had stopped genuinely accounting for how the other side was thinking. She said, "I never made that mistake again. After that, I always started with the other side, with how the argument looks from there, what they see that I'm not seeing yet." I understood something then that I had not quite understood before. 5 years of her being inside my arguments, not as an adversary reading the available record, but as someone who had spent enough time accounting for how I thought to understand where my structure was load-bearing and where it was assumed. That was not standard preparation. That was the kind of attention you pay to something you cannot look away from, organized into the only form the situation made permissible. I said, "There were arguments you could have made against me that you didn't make." She looked at me. "In Denver," I said. "The third assumption in the liability model. You identified the gap, but you argued around it rather than through it. I have thought about why for 2 years." She was quiet for a long moment. She said, "The gap would have been personal. The way you had built the assumption told me something about the case theory. There was also something about you. The specific place where your confidence in your client's story had outrun your verification of the methodology. It was accurate. It was also the kind of argument that would have felt like an attack on your judgment, rather than a challenge to the model. You chose not to make it," I said. She looked at the table, then at me. It was the first time I understood that the rivalry was not only strategic, she said, that it had a different kind of boundary in it. I said, "You won Denver anyway." She said, "I know. But I won it on the methodology, not on the personal thing. There is a difference." I said, "That is why you found the New York document." She said, "That is why I find most things." I said, "You spend more time in the opposing argument than most people spend in their own." She said, "It is the most useful place to be." I said, "You have been in my arguments for 3 years." She said, "Yes." I said, "What did you find?" She looked at me across the table. The warm light of the restaurant and the city beyond the window and 3 hours of the kind of conversation that reconfigures things. She said, "That you are the only person I have argued against who builds from the same first principle I do, which is that the most honest argument is the strongest one. That most people build strategically. You build structurally. When you find a weakness, you do not paper over it. You rebuild the foundation." I said, "You do the same thing." She said, "I know. I recognized it in Denver. Before Denver, I had never seen anyone else do it. The thing between us at the table was not the case anymore. It had not been the case for most of the evening. It had become what was underneath the case, what had been underneath all the cases, the specific quality of attention two people pay each other when the professional justification is real but insufficient." She said, "I want to say something that I have spent 5 years not saying. I said she could. She said, "The rivalry was the only language I had for it." For a long time I told myself it was enough. That building the better argument against you was the same as being as close to you as the situation allowed. I told myself that for 3 years. I said, "What changed?" She said, "You counted the minutes the pen was still." She said, "Nobody who is only a professional adversary counts the minutes." I looked at her across the table. "The rivalry was never only a rivalry," I said. "No," she said. I said, "It was how we were in the same room without saying the other thing." She said, "For 5 years." We left the restaurant at 11. On the pavement outside, the December air was the same temperature as the courthouse steps, but different in the way that evenings after real conversations are always different from the evenings before them. She had her coat. I had mine. The city was doing the nighttime thing it does when it has quieted down to the people who belong to it past 10 o'clock. She turned to look at me on the pavement. "I want to say one more thing," she said. "That is not managed." I told her to go ahead. "I have argued across a table from 100 attorneys," she said. "I have prepared cases against some of the best in the country and won and lost, and the work has always been the work." She was quiet for a moment. "You are the only one I have ever had to practice not thinking about." I looked at her. "That took 5 years to say," I said. "It cost approximately that much," she said. I touched her jaw, the way I had at the window in the suite, the warm skin of it, and the breath she let slow rather than controlled, and I kissed her on the pavement outside a restaurant she had been going to after difficult trials for 6 years, in the December cold on 68th and Lex. Patient. The specific patience of something arrived at rather than reached for, all the restraint of 5 years finding somewhere better to go than staying still. Her hand at the lapel of my coat. Neither of us moving toward anything except what was already happening. When we stepped back, the city was still there. She said quietly, "I do not want to go home alone tonight." I said, "Then don't." She didn't. There were post-trial motions, as there always are after a verdict of this scale. Calder Whitmore filed in January. I responded in February. The motion was denied in March. Both sides filed their appellate notices. The case was going to occupy both of us for another 18 months in various configurations, which is the nature of securities litigation, and which neither of us had been able to avoid by virtue of anything that had happened on the 18th floor, or the courthouse steps, or a restaurant table on Lexington Avenue. What was different was that we stopped pretending to manage what we had been managing. It took time. It required work in the way that things maintained in separate professional containers for 5 years require work when you attempt to have them occupy the same space. We were both difficult people who were accustomed to being the most controlled presence in any room and who had spent years using that control as a substitute for the messier kinds of honesty. We had arguments that were precise and inconvenient, and that both of us brought the same structural rigor to that we brought to opening arguments. It was occasionally a significant amount. But the attention held. It held the same way it had held for 5 years across counsel tables and courthouse corridors and a hotel room in Chicago, which was completely because the other person had always been the most serious thing in the room, and that had not diminished by being acknowledged. It had simply stopped requiring us to pretend it wasn't true. She was still the best opposing counsel I had ever faced. I was still the only attorney she had ever had to practice not thinking about. What changed was the accounting. For 5 years the accounting had happened privately, in the specific quiet of late flights home and the morning before hearings, and the particular hours between midnight and 2 in a hotel room when the deposition transcripts were finished and there was nothing left to think about except the thing I had decided not to think about. It had been a private ledger, maintained without acknowledgement, with the specific discipline of someone who knew exactly what was in it and had decided that knowing was sufficient. That ledger was no longer private. She knew what was in it because we had sat at a table on 68th and Lex for 3 hours and taken turns reading it aloud. And the difference between a private accounting and a shared one is not that the facts change. The facts were the same facts. 5 years of them, the Denver flight and the New York transcript and the third Chicago corridor and the hotel room and the pen. But that they now existed in a space where they could be revised in real time, where a new entry did not have to be filed alone and interpreted without context. She called me from her car one morning in January when the post-trial motions were still being drafted. She had an argument for the motion that she was working through aloud, not asking for my help with it. We were still on opposite sides, but thinking through the structure of something in the way that some people think better spoken than silent. I listened. I did not tell her where the gap in the argument was. I told her the gap was there. She said she knew. She had called, I understood later, not for the legal analysis but for the particular quality of being heard by someone who would understand what she was building without having to explain the foundation. I understood because I had spent 3 years inside her arguments. The understanding was, now, mutual. In February, I was walking the hallway past the conference room she had booked for appellate prep and heard her through the glass door, working through the record with one of her associates. The associate said something. She responded with the precise, dry correction she deployed when an argument was almost right and needed one more structural fix. And I stood in the hallway and thought about 3 years from now and 5 years from now and the specific pleasure of paying full attention to a thing that turns out to deserve it. I knocked and opened the door. She looked up from the conference table. "Your appellate theory on damages," I said. "The third assumption in the jury instruction argument. Your expert's rebuttal testimony on the second variant is thinner than you think." She looked at me. "You are giving me your opposing analysis," she said. "You'll find it in a week," I said. "I'm saving you the week." She held the pen. She set it down. "You know I will use it," she said. "That is why I told you," I said. She looked at me across the conference table the way she had looked at me through the gold-toned elevator doors on the first night, and across the counsel table when the verdict came in, and from the bottom of the courthouse steps in December, that same complete attention with the same thing underneath it that was not assessment at all. She said, "Enemies don't help each other close the gap in the appellate brief." "No," I said, "they don't." "So whose idea was that?" I looked at her. "Mutual failure of imagination," I said. "We could have stayed enemies. We didn't." She held my gaze for a long, still moment. "We really could not have," she said. I left her to the preparation. In the hallway I stood for a moment and thought about the question I had asked on the last night of the pre-trial conference, at the window of room 1804 with the city behind her, and 5 years of everything between us. And about the answer she had not said in words but had said in the way she did not step back. Whose idea was it? Both of ours. Both of ours. The whole time, which was the answer the hotel room had understood before either of us did, and which had been waiting in the space between us since the third deposition in New York, when she had written a question in her notes, and I had asked it 3 seconds before she could, and something in both of us had recognized the other and had not found a better word for it than adversary. Adversary. The person you pay the most attention to, the one who makes your work better because you cannot afford to be anything less than your best when they are across the table. The one you build for and prepare for and study, because the alternative is being outpaced by someone whose quality requires yours to match it. The one you finally kiss on a pavement in December because 5 years of calling it something else has cost enough. We had been the same kind of careful for the same kind of reason since before either of us had said so, and the hotel room had simply been the place where we ran out of room to call it anything else. Enemies don't share beds, but we had never actually been enemies. We had been two people paying very close attention to each other in the only language we knew, waiting for one of us to count the minutes the pen was still,